Namaste, everyone. Welcome to the Productive Podcast. Today we have Dr. Nidhi, a medical license in medicine. She is a well-trained healer, and she is a spiritual enthusiast, having many spiritual experiences since a young age. And today we are going to talk about a very special topic called detachment. So please welcome Nidhi.
Hi, Jason. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you for being on. And I think today, what's something I'm so excited for is the topic about detachment, right? So, you can't have detachment without attachment. And, it can get a little bit complex, but I think for the audience, a lot of us can find value in this conversation. But before we kind of get started with the topic, can you just tell a little bit more about yourself for us in the audience and and how you kind of got to where you are now?
Sure. In a sense, I was a very existential kid. I would always, I'd question everything. But also, um, I moved around a lot. So I saw a lot of different communities, cultures, and I started asking deeper questions about life at a very, very young age. So when I was 7, 8, I'd watch children play, and instead of playing with them, I'd be thinking, what is the purpose of life? Like, we go through this, we go through all of the cycle. What does
Wow,
it
at the
mean?
age of 7, you were
8, I
thinking,
remember for sure,
oh,
because
8. I'm sorry. Okay.
I'd moved, I just moved from Singapore to India, and I had been in a girls' school there, and and in India it was a co-education school,
Yes.
and cultures are different, the way people perceive function. And Singapore is a city country, right? And India is like packed with people. It was just, there was a lot of change.
Mhm.
And so I started observing all these differences as well as the similarities. So I started asking deeper questions in my mind. What is the point of all of this? And um, by the time I was 12 or 13, it really, really bothered me. And it was like the predominant thing that was driving the choices that I made, whether it was for career or for other things. Um, I, as a part of this, and because of course my parents had no idea how to deal with these kind of questions, they helped me explore a lot of different schools, spiritual teachings. So I had learned techniques in meditation, breathing, and other things when I was 11 or 12. Whenever they do things in the community or nearby, my parents would take me. And if they explored something and they were like, oh, this is cool, maybe this will contribute to Nidhi, and then, I would also go. So I had a lot of fun exploring these different things. In itself, this was one of the driving factors because I wanted to do something that really made a difference to people. And making serving people as part of the core of my life was already there in my psyche. So that drove me to actually pursue medicine. Initially, I was really afraid that I wouldn't be able to handle people who were sick and suffering and I'd be too attached.
Yeah.
Um, but later on, it was also that, hey, I care. And that became the driving factor itself for me to do medicine. And
Yeah.
side by side, I started learning healing, more meditation. There were doctors, other people around me who also learned meditation. I started seeing deeper aspects of how energy connects with life, with living, with disease. That can be a whole talk by itself, if you ask me.
Yeah, absolutely. I
But
thank you for that summary. I think that definitely gives the audience like a good history and perspective of where you're coming from.
right.
Sounds like you
So
may
for
have.
me, it was always, looking at what is the deeper perspective and the spiritual aspect, and then what is the physical aspect? How do they correlate and how do they combine?
Yeah.
And I think that the topic for today, which is detachment, is also a similar topic, which is very, very, very deeply practical and connected to our daily living, even though it can seem like a lofty spiritual topic. So I think it's very in theme with the way that I
Yeah,
perceive and look at life as well.
absolutely. And I think because we're both in medicine, going into medicine, we care for people, but in terms of detachment, it's very important because you don't want to um, be too attached where you would hinder the progress of the patient or yourself. And I'm sure with your experiences working with patients that not all of them live, right? Not all of them get to make it to the end of treatment, and that's part of
Right,
being a doctor, of being a physician. Detachment is very important in that aspect of medicine.
right.
But I'm very interested in talking about what we're going to talk about today. So before we get into that, what is your definition of detachment?
So there are many, many ways to look at it. So I think some of the questions that we really need to ask is, first of all, what is it? And what are also the things we want to apply it to? Very often, I think the idea of detachment sometimes is confused with indifference or
Indifferent.
not caring. Indifference or not caring. And those don't really correlate for me. And I'll explain why in a moment. But I think in order to understand attachment, we also need to talk about what is attachment and how it's different from love and kindness. The way that I think about it is love and kindness is a give function. It's not a take function, it's a give function. It's what you stand for, what you contribute. And it's there's a generosity of spirit, a kindness, a nurturing, a taking care of, understanding patients, all of that together kind of forms the umbrella of the expressions of love, right? Because it's love is so difficult to define in itself. And I think that attachment is partly a take function. Not that there's anything wrong with it at all, and it's very normal, right? And in many spaces, it's actually very healthy, right? Because even as a doctor, I've seen that attachment between the mother and the child actually is beneficial for both of them, physiologically, emotionally, and for that uh, nurturing to happen in the development in the relationship, and for also the physical safety and emotional growth and all of that of the child is really vital. So it's important to know that attachment has its function. And
Yes.
although we're talking about detachment, all attachment is not wrong and there's no problem there.
Right.
That's the fundamental thing that we need to get.
Yeah.
In the way, I really love the way Master Choa talks about detachment, in that he talks about life as cycles of attachment and then detachment. And I think this is really beautiful because even in the example of parenting that we just talked about, right?
Yes.
There is this period of attachment, but as the child grows, older and older, there's a point at which they're ready to take off on their own. And even in between, there are many stages where there are things that they know that they can already take care of their own on their own. And then there's more and more that they take on. And as parents, you know, we need to detach,
Yeah.
detach. So there's always cycles. And what's truly important is knowing what to detach from, when to detach. And I think those are the crucial things, and that can be tricky. And um, one of the beautiful things I'd like to say that I've found about detachment very specifically is it's something that you let go. It's not something you do.
Hmm. Can you explain a little bit further? Like, what does it mean to let go instead of
Right.
like doing it?
So um, uh, let me say it this way, and I'll tell you where the insight comes from. Um, Earlier in my younger years, I actually found it very hard to detach or let go. And one of the things I realized, especially in relationships, right, whether it was close family relationships, friends, if I felt deeply hurt or betrayed beyond a particular point, in my mind, I would cut them off. So what I was doing was not really detachment, right? Not internal detachment. Of course, there are some who you forgive and you're like, I'd be like, okay, I'm going to forgive, I let them go, but I don't want them anymore. And that was the general state with which I dealt with things. Until one point where I realized, hey, if I just continue down this path, I've got to be a hermit of some sort because I can't maintain relationships like that because there are you have to be willing in certain cases to nurture beyond that, let go, look beyond that, and continue to engage. For me, I could either pull apart completely and be like, oh, you don't exist for me anymore, or I'm going to be attached. And um, nothing in between existed. And I realized that that doesn't work in real practical life. You have to be willing to
Right.
do things that are intermediate, especially with family, with close friends, with colleagues, because there's a practical aspect of it, right?
Still see
So,
them. They're not. They're always going to be around in some sort of capacity. You can't just completely. Yeah.
right, exactly. So, in this sense, detachment is sort of being willing to let life pass through you and not hold. That's why I say it's not so much of doing as much of letting go. So, as an example, if on this particular moment, like, we're talking about attachment, right? But, maybe a week ago, I thought about this call, right? And I made plans for what I can say, what I can do, what you may ask me, what I could. So, I have all these ideas. And it may be that you ask me a different question, or something else is happening here, something else is required here, the flow of the conversation is different. But if I'm like, hey, I thought that, and that is the only thing that I want to do, this conversation is going to be so hard, right?
Yeah.
You're going to be like, what's happening here? I'm going to be like, what's happening here? It's going to be a disaster, right?
Yeah.
So you have to be willing to see that, oh, this is where this is going. I flow with it. So you have to
Yes.
let it pass through you and flow with it. So it's sort of a letting go. But
Right.
if you're too focused on what we need to
I think
do,
I'm starting. Yeah. Understand.
overriding that, it then you're still attached, even if you're like, oh, I'm trying to do it. So we can be in a state of detachment and still do, but we're in the flow, we're being present, we're being with the moment, and we're aware of what's happening, and we're also trying to direct it. That's very different from here's where I want to go, and
Yeah,
then
I think the analogy, and if I could kind of summarize, I find that attachment and detachment is like both sides of the same coin when it comes
absolutely.
to flow, right? And when it comes to flow, especially in energy healing and pranic healing, we talk about, just being like channel, right? Just being able to receive and give. And what I'm hearing from you, Nidhi, with your experiences and your stories, and especially for the audience that can relate, right? It's like you don't want to be too rigid, right? Especially with your example, like, oh, we had like questions that you wrote down and how I'm going to answer it for the conversation. But what if I give you a different question? Then now we'll throw everything off, right? So part of flow is learning or being able to detach from that preparation and attaching to something spontaneous, right? Something that just comes up. So again, it's that turning on, turning off, and I find it so useful because, like you mentioned, it's very important to know what to detach from, when to detach from, and eventually we're going to talk about how to detach from it, right? Because in pranic healing meditation, we have certain tools that can help us with that. Is that a correct kind of summary of just what we've been talking
Oh,
about?
absolutely.
Yeah, great. So, so you kind of spoke about, the example with family and friends detaching from that because you could see like, okay, eventually, if I'm gonna detach from all of them, you're gonna be like a hermit, right? You're gonna be living alone, but you still need to function in our world, right? In our society. What are like other examples that that's important to learn to detach from or be aware of to detach from?
Great. um so what I would say is the first thing is to always remind ourselves that it's okay to be attached and be willing to be attached. And why I say this is that there are two ways in which we may deal with something if we're not willing to do it, right? So if I am not willing to be angry, for example, right? One of two things is going to happen, which is either I'm going to suppress it and be like, oh, I'm not angry, but then it's there and I'm just going to hold it inside me,
And a lot of people are like that.
right? Or I project it. It's not me who's angry, but the other person who's wrong, and I'm going to blow up, right? There are two options. And but if I'm willing to be angry, I can say, oh, here's this emotion. I'm angry. Okay, cool. And these are all the, of course, the different factors. This has happened, blah, 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 and this has created this response. But by being present with it, I can now ask more questions. What am I angry about? What has actually happened here? And what are the causes of that? And actually, it, I have greater insights when I'm being present. Because, for example, the last time that I was angry, because I was willing to see that I'm angry, acknowledge that I'm angry, and be with it, it also dissipated faster. So the detachment was also automatically happening because I was willing to accept and embrace that I was not in a state of detachment, that I was very attached and very angry at this moment because something that I thought was hadn't happened. And being with that, I was able to suddenly see that, hey, this other person has no awareness or understanding of what it is I'm attached to, what it is I desire, and how they've really not fulfilled it. And they have no awareness of any of these levels. And now I have to communicate something different to them so that we can collaborate again in this relationship or patch this up or, change this in some way. And then I was able to interact in a way that they kind of understood, oh, this person needed empathy and compassion. And instead of that, I was, trying to show them XYZ or this is what they should do and, be in that
Their
space.
interpretation of what they did.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, in being willing to see that we are attached, we can start to see the different things that are happening better. So, the beginning of objectivity and detachment is in saying, I am attached.
To actually see and understand, acknowledge that
Right.
you're attached. Okay.
Right. And now that I know that, oh, I've been attached, the next step is to say, okay, now because I'm attached, what are the other things that are happening because of that? For example, let's say I'm attached. I'm in a competition and I'm attached that I want to win, or I'm attached that I want to go to this school or this university or I want this job. Right. One of the big things that can happen is I'm afraid of failing or that I won't get what I want, right? So then I know that I'm aware of that. And I know that from time to time that emotion is going to pop. So let's say I suddenly start avoiding applying. I'm not applying for colleges. I'm not taking action. I'm not applying to the job or I'm not training for the competition anymore. And something is pulling me back and I just want to do something else. I can say, hey, what's happening here? And I'll know, oh, one of the factors is that I'm afraid of failing. I have a fear that I'll be rejected. I have a fear that, things will not work out this way or that way. So I can see all the things that are driving me under that and correlated to that. And the beauty of that is I can say, oh, I see all these things. And then you can look at coping mechanisms for these different things. You can push them out of the way so you can continue to focus. Because we don't even know that our attachments are often derailing us. And the first need is to be able to see it and understand what it's creating for us, doing to us. And
Right.
essentially, it's what we're doing to ourselves. And understanding that can really, really start to open up spaces where we can change things.
As as Master Choa said, without awareness, there is no transformation. Right. So
Absolutely.
without even knowing like you are attached to something and the degree of your attachment, right? Because as you know, there's different levels to it. It's hard to change. It's hard to find the motivation and the need to change without seeing that. So we spoke about, and that's such a brilliant answer to my first question. So, um, what are some tools? What are some methods that you use to kind of help kind of progress you from okay seeing that okay I might be attached to these couple things, what kind of inspires you to take the next steps and what are those next steps to kind of move forward?
Before I get to that, there's one more aspect of detachment that I would like to mention because I think it's very relevant and important for people to understand. And it actually relates to the teachings of the Lord Buddha, where the first noble truth he talks about is that there's suffering in life, right? Um, and being attached, sometimes, we're attached to something and it works out our way and we're extremely happy about it. And, we celebrate it, there's joy. There are times we are attached, and because of the attachment, we have anxiety, we have fear, we have all of that during the journey. At the end of which, we may have celebration or whatever if it works out for us, or we may grieve or experience failure, and all of that happens, right? And knowing that in this process of learning attachment and detachment, it's important to have compassion for ourselves to know that um, since we're not perfect, we're not always going to be detached, and so we are going to suffer on this path from time to time, and that's completely normal. As long as we're not saints and we're human, that's normal. So there are times when life will be really good and times when life will not be so good, right? That also ties into something called the law of cycles, where things are good and then not so good, and then they get better again. So something that's good doesn't always stay good, and something that's not so good doesn't always stay bad either. So really understanding that helps us also detach from the idea and the programming that the world often gives us that life has to be always getting better. You should always have more money than you had before, always have better relationship, better career. There are times when, temporarily there'll be a dip. And if we accept that, understand that, hey, this is normal, and then you continue to, sow seeds, and then life gets better again.
Mm,
Because you know that when it's winter, summer is going to come in its own time. And we can fight all we want with winter, and it's not going to change. And as if we embrace it, there's possibility that we can have, experience some joy in the winter. Maybe we go ice skating, maybe we go skiing, or there's something else that we can do to enjoy what's there in the winter before it's sunny and again. So we need to know that um, tough times also within them hold special spaces, um, and to understand and embrace them as part of a journey to grow, and that is one of the key and important lessons related to detachment. And the reason I wanted to bring this up is because often we think that, oh, something is not going so well in my life, there must be something wrong with me, or there's something wrong with the other person, if it's a relationship problem. Because they can have cycles where they're better and then they're not so good. It's important to continue to nurture and keep going forward, but and also reflect and say, hey, what do I need to change? And that's okay. But that doesn't mean that we need to be judged, or we need to think that there's something wrong with us, or it's the end of the world. So that attitude is really important um, in the journey of detachment and, of course, life itself.
yes, because I can
And
see one being very can really take this far. Like, oh, what am I attaching to? What can I detach? It's like kind of be overly critical. It's like overdoing it too. So there is like a middle path.
right, right. And it's a path of compassion and understanding because we need to know that we are attached currently, and the path of detachment, of learning what to detach from, when to detach, and then how to detach takes time. And we're going to stumble through this path, and we have to be okay with all the
Yeah,
stumbling and everything that happens. And
it kind of reminds me of like when you were talking about like growing up. You need your parents, right? So you're growing up in the bird's nest, right? But eventually you need to learn to fly on your own. And flying on your own implies like mistakes, right? Your parents not being there, but you're learning on your own. So I think that's a really good analogy, especially when you talk about law of cycles and how things never stay the same; they eventually change too. I think that's very important to see the bigger picture because a lot of people we get fixated on the short term, right? Because the short term is what we experience, and we have present moment bias. But really, what we're talking about is the micro and the macro altogether. So
Right.
yeah, and is this a good segue into like how we can detach now?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. Um, so there are different techniques that we can use. Of course, we can use the power of the mind through thinking, asking questions. We can do energy work. We can do meditation. There are various methods to do it. So I can share like a few methods that I try to practice, and of course there are more, and then we can delve into it. Um, One of the ways, I mean, any method that we want to use to develop detachment, and the reason why we talked for so long about awareness is you do need to know what to change in order to change it through whatever method, right? Of course, sometimes, there are times when I don't know what is the problem also. I'm like, why isn't this working? I don't know yet,
Mhm.
and I have to think through, right? So meditation certainly helps in that. Especially the meditation on twin hearts. Sometimes when I'm doing meditation, I get amazing insights. Like, now this seems so obvious. How come I didn't think of it before? But, sometimes we just need that help. And it may be, talking to a therapist, talking to a life coach, talking to somebody else who, or reading something that gives us that insight and that awareness of, oh, this is what's happening. And sometimes awareness in itself is the first step of transformation. Because I did say that, you can't force a detachment, and often that leads to more attachment. It's like the harder you try to resist, it
Yes.
becomes the ultimate temptation. Because, I say, hey, Jason, don't think of a mango. And you're like, what are you thinking of? And
I
you're like,
can't stop thinking of a mango now.
exactly.
Yeah.
So it's just the thing that happens. So, the harder you try to break away, it just becomes that the juicy mango, you know.
Yeah.
So um so it's important not to reject, oh, I'm attached, this is the worst thing in the world, but to be like, normal, and that's what
Right.
exists. And so once we know it, engage with it, then you can start taking different
Sure.
steps. One of the ways that I love doing it is honestly healing it. So I do use a lot of pranic healing. If I have too much expectations, too much attachment on something, I do heal it to say the excess expectation and all of that, to remove and unburden the fears and the emotions. Because when I also look at, hey, I'm attached to this, I also know I'm afraid of failing, I'm afraid of all rejection or these other aspects, right? So I already know that all of that package is coming with my attachment. So I try to unburden as much of it as possible so that I can continue to engage with it. Um, and Also, one of the big ways to detach is to really embrace the moment and be deeply present with it.
What does that mean?
For example, if something has happened right now and it has upset me, right? One is to know that I'm upset because, I had an attachment that things should go a certain way and they haven't gone that way and I'm upset, right? So the first thing is to know I'm disappointed. I'm, upset that this person maybe said something that I didn't like or whatever that is, right? And the second part is to recognize that what I'm going through is normal. There's nothing wrong with the response I've had. And to understand why I feel that way. So being present and being very curious with yourself, to say, oh, why is it that why is it that I'm upset? Or why is it that I'm angry about this? Everybody doesn't respond this way, right? And there are different options for how we may respond or react. And why have I reacted this way? And sometimes that brings me deep insight into something, for example, whenever I've seen this particular action in the past, those people have then gone on to reject me. So what happens is the moment I've seen this action, I've decided this person is going to reject me. And that conclusion has taken me into fear. Maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But I understand that this is a pattern playing out here.
Right.
So this is using the power of the mind. So you be present with it, engage with it, get curious, ask yourself questions. Hey, what's happening? What's going on? Is there something old, is there an old wound that's become raw now? Or,
Yeah.
what is it really? And to not judge yourself and hold yourself in that compassion and then go deeper and then allow yourself to be kind and loving and vulnerable, and in that compassion,
Yeah.
really heal yourself because you're giving yourself the space and witnessing your own pain essentially. And I do want to say that this technique can be hard sometimes. And for me, the biggest game changer to do this more easily is really self love. The ability to love yourself more deeply, and give to yourself more deeply. And there are many techniques to develop self love, affirmations. There's so much content that you can look at. One of my favorite ways is again to heal and to enhance. Because when I set the intention before I do the meditation that this is the thing that I want to work on, being detached or being more loving to myself, and then I do the meditation, it's like I've really set and created the space for that in the meditation. And it can be so deeply transforming and healing, especially when I've set that intention because I've become more receptive to it. I've made the space for it. I'm asking for it. And it shows up really beautifully. Um, I've, I've done this meditation so many times, but there are still times when I experience so much love. I genuinely tear
Yeah.
because you're moved by the compassion.
Absolutely.
And it, it's so amazing. I was so surprised, how we talk about compassion to others, right? After meditation once, I genuinely felt that compassion towards myself, to say, hey, I've been hurting about this, or here is a raw wound, or here's something that I struggled with. And I've really not said, hey, this is something I struggled with and I tried and I got here, or I didn't get here, or just really appreciated that, even if it didn't bear the fruit that I wanted to. But to really appreciate that and have that kindness, I didn't realize it was missing, that I was missing that for myself until I had that for myself. And I was like, oh, this is compassion. I was like, I always thought of compassion
Yeah.
as an outward thing,
Right.
and not something that you extend to
Yourself.
yourself deeply. And detachment really deeply correlates with love. Because when you're so beautifully aligned to that state of giving, and there's no resistance to that, you're actually always simultaneously receiving. And this is such a strange thing because I always thought it's going to be one or the other, and it didn't realize how you can do both at the same time. And it was only in being deeply in love that I understood that really it can happen at the same time. Like if you think about, people in love, right? They're often giving and receiving at the same time. It's not like, oh, one person loves and then the other person loves. And I mean, there are times when you may receive more and give more, but it's simultaneous, right? So, in a state of deep love and compassion to ourselves and to others, it's actually possible to develop a much deeper level of detachment as well, because you're simultaneously receiving it for what it is and you're accepting it for what it is. So we're not projecting my ideas from the past onto this or what I want in the future onto this. I'm really deeply being present, and that can be a wonderful gift of deep, deep love and compassion.
Well, that was an amazing. It felt like a monologue almost in terms of. I felt like I asked you one question, but you gave me an entire book, Nidhi. But just to allow me to summarize, again, I asked, things that we talked about: what to detach from, when to detach from, how to detach from, and it sounds like we know the tools of meditation, between hearts and healing. Those are very active tools. But to kind of answer my question, you spoke about awareness, right? And that's really what I think about when you say talk about being present the moment, because I didn't really think of that being as a tool, because that's so passive, right? When I think of like how to detach, I think, oh, it's active, you have to do it, right? But when you said, oh, being present in the moment, that's interesting to me, because I've never thought of it that way. I thought of it as just being aware. But you highlighted all the benefits, right, of being present in the moment and really giving yourself the space for that, compassion and self love for yourself. It's almost healing in that moment as well when you just see it
Absolutely.
for what it is, right? And I think it's so amazing for a lot of people just to understand that, right? It really goes a long way. Initially, you might not see a lot of value out of it, but like you said, it goes so deep, right? It goes so deep when you're loving yourself unconditionally, right? Giving yourself that compassion unconditionally. And I think that's such a simple and beautiful way to approach this topic, because in life we have so many things, going on. We're always attached, and you know attached to a lot of things, but detachment is something that we rarely talk about. And I think through the lens of compassion and self-love that you're describing is really a unique perspective that'll help a lot of people, even for me, right, to think about it, right? And
Even
now,
me, I'm
yeah,
still learning.
yeah, we're all still
um,
learning. So
Absolutely.
yeah,
I
um,
do really like that you
yeah,
emphasized about the passiveness of it. And it's really important to know because, when you think of attachment, you're always thinking of doing something. That's the nature of attachment. Um, and detachment is really, in a way, letting go and being at rest with the thing itself, because that's what detachment is. Because the attachment is like, I'm with it, and
yeah,
detachment is like withdrawing from it
yeah,
in a way. So there is a pause involved. So if we don't give the space for the pause and the stillness,
yeah,
it's hard to get to the detachment.
mhm,
And that's why I I really use a lot of running healing, or the different purification techniques. I use them to unburden myself so I can get to the space of pause.
yeah,
Because if I'm so attached that I'm really anxious and I'm worried and I'm in fear, and I'm like, okay, now let me get to a pause and let me get to a stillness. Highly unlikely I'm reaching there from that state, right? Because I need to bring myself down. So it can be breathing techniques as well. They're also wonderful to generate stillness and that quiet. So some people do different kinds of pranayama techniques.
yeah,
You can do chanting to sort of calm yourself
many
from the
different ways.
thoughts. So
Yeah,
you can use these different techniques to bring the mind down and calm it down. So then you can create the pause and
yes,
then create the space for the detachment.
absolutely.
It's really a passive state to get there. And then the beautiful thing is, from a state of detachment, you can always re engage because you can see more, there's more clarity. Let me maybe share something about a little bit
Yeah,
about my journey of detachment. So then,
sure. If we can
um,
just make it a little bit shorter of a story, if that's okay, just because we're
oh,
running
yeah,
out
it
of
is
time.
a short
Yeah,
story.
yeah. Okay, great.
Um, I wanted to say that in by learning how to detach, the first thing that we need to detach from is um, the idea that we shouldn't be attached. And in engaging and seeing things more broadly, more clearly, and in starting to be objective, what actually happened for me was my experiences, my um, emotions and the different things were actually more intense. And we often think that detachment is a state where everything will be subdued. And interestingly, I found that it was the opposite for me. Maybe eventually it will become subdued. I don't know about that. But what happened is, since I'm not projecting something onto this moment to say that it has to be what I thought, or, this should be going in some other way, what happened is I was engaging with it more deeply, more intensely. So I was less distracted when I was dealing with each thing. And so the experience was actually more deeper. I had more bliss, more joy. Um, and even if, with attachment, there was, like I gave you the example of when I was angry or upset, since I was willing to be with each emotion in a detached way, it was more intense, but I also moved past. So I wasn't carrying baggage forward. At the same time, it's still an intense life. And when I experienced that was when I really understood what Master Chua meant when he said live life intensely. But he also talked about, attachment and detachment. And I was like, now these two things make so much sense. I didn't understand it in this way before until I experienced it in this way. So I just wanted to say that it can look different for different people, and there's no wrong journey.
I think that's the theme for this conversation, right, Nidhi? I think you bring up such an interesting topic, and you think it should go one way, but you don't know until you do it, right? And it could go the
Yeah.
opposite way. And I think that's the beauty of life, and especially Master Choa's teachings, right, and pranic healing or Hatha yoga, because it offers us that space of like, oh, it goes the conventional way, okay, that I'll go with the conventional way. But if it goes the opposite way, there's an explanation, there's a meaning to that.
Right.
So thank you for sharing that personal story, because for me, for my own self reflection, I have a lot of things to attach from, and I can see how it might actually amplify and intense when I'm in that period, that moment. So so that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And to kind of close the conversation, I know it's been almost like 40 minutes already. It's kind of I felt like it's just been five. If for you, Nidhi, if you were someone came up to you on the street, just an average person, and they were asking you, "Hey, Nidhi, um, I need advice. How can I detach? What's like a very simple answer, life advice you would give them to help improve their life for that moment, that day of their week? What's something you would say?
If I want to leave people with something very small, I'm really going to say, um, get comfortable with being attached, and everything that comes with that. So, if you're attached, then know that you're going to be in for a ride and go with the ride. You cannot force the detachment, but be aware of all the emotions that are coming underneath. Go with the ride. And by the time the experience completes, you will find yourself in a space of detachment because you have gone with that flow. And the detachment will be the outcome of experiencing and going with the attachment, because when you live it out fully, the cycle will naturally detach. But if you fight with it, um, and disengage from the attachment, or try to suppress it, we won't reach that point where it finishes its cycle, and naturally detaches. We know how to naturally detach. It's something we all know how to do. I mean, we breathe, right? We inhale and then we exhale, right? So we eat and then the food goes through the system and it gets out, right? In the animal kingdom, there are animals, they're pregnant, they have the baby, and then they know at one point they have to let go of the baby. Nobody taught them that that's the thing. They're not telling each other, oh, you're going to go through this process and then you're going to have to let the baby out. But they know. The body knows these
Natural.
things.
Yeah.
Yes. So we know how to do it. And the key is to trust the process. So you go with the process to complete it. Go with the flow and trust, and you will get there. Trust is the key.
Go with the flow and trust. Okay. Well, I'm gonna go with the flow and trust, and I'm gonna get some mangoes, and I'm gonna go through that attachment. And when I'm done eating with those mangoes, I'll detach from it.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Nidhi. It's been a really amazing and valuable conversation for not only our audience, but for me, just listening to you and learning about all the different aspects of attachment, the attachment.
Yes.
And I think, again, this applies to everything in life. So I'm so grateful for your presence. I'm so grateful for your experiences, and yeah, thank you. So, and if the audience would like to reach you, I'm gonna share your contact information if that's okay. If they have any questions or
Absolutely.
things like
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
Okay.
sure.
All right. Great. So thank you
I,
so
I
much.
love exploring this. Feel free to bombard me with any
Definitely
questions.
sounds like it. So no problems detaching there. Um, so thank you everyone. Thank you for listening. Namaste, and we look forward to seeing everyone in the next.
Thank you so much, Jason.